I am Dwayne Brown. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, allowed to go home after being deported.
I cried and I was in shock just because a lot of people told us this would be years, this would be a no-way case.
Hallelujah.
The mission to bring back this man of faith to San Diego and the unusual nature of his case.
Padres manager Bud Black is replaced with interim manager Pat Murphy. I'm Peggy Pico with how the management shakeup could play out this season. Also ahead, wage theft at San Diego County restaurants. A new survey explains how employers are stealing worker wages at an alarming rate and what needs to be done to stop it.
Cute but contagious, a virus hitting man's best friend in San Diego. A warning for dog lovers and why they may want to avoid small puppies. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us. New developments tonight on the state budget. Just hours ago, Governor Jerry Brown and state lawmakers announced a deal on the $115 billion spending plan. It sends billions of dollars more to public schools and universities. As part of the agreement, lawmakers accepted the governor's more conservative revenue estimates.
But in this budget, we're helping low-income working Californians with an income tax credit. We're spending billions in our schools. And spending it in a way that helps those kids and those families that come from the most difficult circumstances. And we also pay down our debts, and we build up our rainy day fund.
The budget plan includes more funding for Medi-Cal coverage for low-income, undocumented children, plus legal support for kids in dependency courts, and more money to help expand enrollment at Cal State campuses. Brown also announced he's calling two special sessions, one to address funding for roads, highways, and other infrastructure, another on Medi-Cal funding. Two different stories on stadium talks in San Diego. Negotiations between the Chargers and the city of San Diego continue today. Mayor Kevin Faulconer says the discussion focused on timing of the project and the resources needed to get it done, but it was light on specifics.
As I said today, we had a productive exchange back and forth. More to come.
The city presented the team several options on how the project could comply with the state's Environmental Quality Act. On the other side of the negotiation table, the Chargers are signaling that an end-of-the-year vote may not be possible. In a statement, team attorney Mark Fabiani says the Chargers have concluded it is not possible to place a ballot measure before voters in December in a legally defensible manner. He cites issues with California's election law and the state's Environmental Quality Act. Fabiani says a special meeting in August with the NFL owners may offer more information on what will happen this year. Up at bat following a management shakeup for the San Diego Padres today, the team named minor league coach Pat Murphy as interim manager. He'll serve for the rest of the season. The decision follows another announcement that rocked the sports world in San Diego. Yesterday, the team fired manager Bud Black. Peggy Pico continues our coverage of the Padres changeup and what it could mean for the rest of this season.
The Padres haven't had a winning season since 2010. Last season, the team finished 18 games behind Los Angeles in the National League West. Joining me with how the termination of Bud Black and the naming of Pat Murphy as interim manager could play out this season is sports analyst Lee Hacksaw Hamilton with San Diego 6. And Hacksaw, as you like to be called, welcome.
Thank you.
This is the last year of Bud Black's contract. So why not just wait till the end of the season? Why pull him now?
I was surprised they hit the eject button 65 games into the season. Season's not over. Still a lot of baseball to be played. Normally, if you were into August and your season had unraveled, maybe you'd make this move, going forward with somebody new for the last month of the year, looking towards next year. This was a small sample size. He had so many injuries. His pitchers have pitched so poorly. They've really never got the full lineup on the field. I was shocked that they did this at this point in time, but At the end of the day, the axiom is managers are hired to be fired, and new broom sweeps clean. The general manager, A.J. Preller, probably wanted his own type of guy there in the dugout.
So different kind of guy, but what stands out as the problem this season?
Well, injuries. I think that more than anything else, and a manager cannot control that. Matt Kemp is not the same player he was when he was with the Dodgers. His first half has been substandard. They just lost Will Myers, who they made a big trade for from Tampa Bay. He now has what I think is a chronic wrist problem, may need surgery. They lost their first baseman, Yonder Alonso, for a chunk of time. Their second baseman has totally disappeared. Jed Jerko has lost his confidence, has been shipped to the minor leagues. And then you got 4 starting pitchers who are not doing what they did the last couple of years. They have a combined record of 5-19. So Bud never had a full deck of cards to play the game with, and his pitchers let him down.
So it sounds like you're saying that this isn't Bud Black's fault.
I think a piece of it might be his fault, but I think the preponderance of the problem is on the field and on the roster. I think at the end of the day, a manager controls the temperature of the clubhouse, motivates players, has to be positive. Maybe Bud Black was too nice a guy. Pat Murphy is a firebrand. He's really different in terms of personality. And maybe A.J. Preller, the GM, is just of the opinion we have to change the culture of what's going on in that clubhouse to get better results on the field.
Do you think expectations were actually higher this year because of the record payroll?
This talk show host turned TV guy said they were going to be 90-72 and win the National League West. So I guess yes. But the expectations were based on what was on paper, and they made all these deals to acquire all these all-stars.
$109 million roster.
Yeah, they picked up Kemp, who's a former MVP candidate. They picked up the World Series pitcher in James Shields, Justin Upton, who's had a really good year, Derek Norris, the catcher, who's had a really good year so far. Those are all all-star players, and Will Myers was a Rookie of the Year, but now he's been hurt. So on paper, when we went to the Cactus League, pretty good roster. That's why the community was excited. That's why their ticket sales are up 600%. Now, it's a disappointing start, but there's still a lot of baseball to be played. They're hoping
a lot more games. How many more games?
Well, there's 90 plus.
90 plus games.
And they're hoping they can put themselves back in the pennant race, and they're not really out of the pennant race at all.
Let's talk about Pat Murphy now, interim manager named this morning. What can you tell us about him briefly?
Very successful career, Arizona State, Notre Dame, left in a sea of controversy, NCAA violations. Padres hired him to manage in the lower farm system, did a good job developing young players, elevated him to AAA. AAA managing is really hard. It's a revolving door of roster players. You got guys coming down who are angry. You got guys coming up to AAA who are trying to get to the major leagues. It's a very tough situation. He's never had a losing season as a manager in minor league baseball, so there is a track record.
So there's a track record there. Do you think he'll be manager next year?
If he finishes strong and the Padres can be a wild card team, and that's still not out of the realm of possibility, yeah, I think there's potential he could be offered the job next year. But if this blows up and Matt Kemp is an old man and these pitchers don't get better, then the question is, do they keep him or do they go get a more established manager? And there's a lot of guys out there.
Okay, we have to end on this. The New York Times recently posted an article, I don't know if you saw it, that said the most cursed sports city in America. San Diego ranked 4th on that, with a special note saying that out of all our sports teams combined, they've played 112 seasons without a championship.
Well, there are places that went a long time without championships, Chicago Cubs, Boston Red Sox, baseball, etc. But what makes it different here, this is a melting pot of people from everywhere who have all types of emotional attachments. And the other thing, we have the sunshine. Teams not doing well, I'll go do something else. You can't do that half the year in Buffalo and Cleveland and Houston.
Fair point. All right, San Diego 6 sports analyst Lee Hackshaw-Hamilton, thanks so much.
My pleasure.
Power for the people. Solana Beach has taken the first step toward establishing a community choice program which allows the coastal city to bypass SDG&E in its energy purchases. KPBS reporter Claire Trageser has the story.
First, a short explainer of what community choice aggregation is. Right now, power comes through SDG&E's system of lines and wires. SDG&E buys the electricity from a variety of sources, including natural gas plants, hydroelectric dams, and wind turbine farms. If a city goes with community choice aggregation, power would still go through SDG&E's grid, but the city would buy the energy, not the utility. That allows cities to have more control over how much of their energy comes from renewable renewable sources. Lisa Huebner, the mayor of Solana Beach, says the program reflects her city's environmentally friendly nature.
I think that our community has demonstrated that they are very environmental and in their orientation, and we would like to make sure that our air remains clean, our waters remain clean.
Solana Beach is now doing a study on whether community choice aggregation would be cheaper than the current SDG&E system. The city of San Diego was supposed to release a similar report in March. City officials say the study is expected any day now. Claire Tregeser, KPBS News.
Planned Parenthood is getting into the app business. The nonprofit has launched a smartphone app that allows people to order testing and treatment kits for sexually transmitted diseases. From our North County Bureau, health reporter Kenny Goldberg tells us the app is free, but the test kit costs $149.
The Planned Parenthood Direct app offers testing for chlamydia and gonorrhea, two of the most common STDs. Users receive a test kit through the mail. They send a urine sample to a lab and receive the results through the app. If they test positive, they're told how to get treatment. Planned Parenthood officials say the app is directed at young people who can't find the time to visit a clinic. As it turns out, men and women under 25 have the highest rates of chlamydia. Men between 20 and 29 have the highest rates of gonorrhea. Planned Parenthood officials say whether people use the app or visit a clinic, the goal is to make STD testing a routine part of preventive care. Kenny Goldberg, KPBS News.
Permission to enter the country without a visa, a Mexican pastor at the heart of a deportation case and the request for parole. KPBS Fronteras reporter Jean Guerrero looks at cases where it's granted and when it's not.
Enrique Cervantes spent the last 2 decades preaching in San Diego County. He was living here illegally, and in April, immigration officials stopped him on his way to a church meeting. Within hours, he was deported to Mexico. Less than 2 months later, the National City resident and pastor is back, offering testimony of his experience.
Y empecé a gritar, ¿de dónde vendrá mi socorro? Mi socorro viene de Jehová, que hizo los cielos y la tierra.
At home with his wife and 4 daughters, the 46-year-old pastor recalls hearing the news that he'd been granted parole.
Todavía no puedo despertar del sueño.
I still can't wake up from the dream. I feel a mix of everything. I'm still nervous. I feel God is still accommodating me.
Me siento que Dios me está acomodando.
His family teamed up with immigration activists and successfully rallied to bring him back into the U.S. temporarily, on parole, so he could argue his case in court. His case? His family, all U.S. citizens, need him. His youngest daughter has Down syndrome. He pays taxes. He's a pillar for his community in the church and volunteers guidance to addicts in rehabilitation. He doesn't think he should be a priority for removal. His daughter Myra Olson led the campaign to bring her father back into the country.
We made about 100 phone calls.
She started a blog about her father's contributions to society and delivered immigration officials a thick binder full of letters of recommendation from the community, tax records, evidence of his family's military and church service, and more.
Helping with the house. My dad's legacy, everything that he's implanted in this country through us, we gathered that packet together. We gathered about 100 letters within a week.
Este es un permiso por un año, por mientras.
Immigration officials gave Cervantes temporary permission to re-enter the U.S. for the purpose of removal proceedings. That means he may get redeported, but he may get to stay. Papi. Maida remembers walking across the border with her father.
I cried and I was in shock just because a lot of people told us this would be years, this would be a no-way case.
Requests for parole are often denied. Last month, 5 families who approached the San Ysidro port of entry to request it were turned away. One man had an epileptic U.S. citizen's son who started having seizures tied to the separation from his father, according to a neurologist.
The thing about parole is that it's discretionary. discretion.
Lilia Velázquez, an immigration lawyer, says Cervantes' case is unusual.
After 9/11, they really raised the bar, and they were very careful. So, for example, people that had immigration violations or committed a crime, even though it was not a felony, the government would say, you know what, we don't want you in the U.S.
Over the past 6 years, deportations of criminals are up 80%.
The Obama administration has been prioritizing the removal of immigrants with criminal convictions and prior immigration violations.
Felons, not families.
This isn't the first time Cervantes has been deported. When he was in his early 20s, he was using alcohol and other substances. He was convicted of a misdemeanor and was deported. That's when he decided to change his life.
I started feeling the need to help drug addicts and alcoholics because that's what I was.
Recent Homeland Security memos advise immigration officials to exercise prosecutorial discretion. This means that although officials have the legal right to deport certain people, they don't have to. The Cervantes family plans to ask for this. Customs and Border Protection and Immigration and Customs Enforcement declined to comment on this case. Cervantes' wife, Marisol, says she's grateful for the opportunity to fight for her husband in court.
Hallelujah. Dios es bueno, hermano.
The first thing we did, we walked. We walked for a long, long time, just me and him, and I was telling him, just breathe. You're here. Every step you make, this is your city, this is where you belong.
Ya terminaste, ya acabaste, ya estás en México, ya no hay solución.
Cervantes says he's not afraid. He thinks God allowed his deportation because he wanted Cervantes to preach at a bigger scale.
Y hacerte de nuevo.
In Mexico, he started taking addicts to church.
God started something and he's going to finish it. That's why I feel confident. I feel God is at my side. He has my hand. Working for him, I don't think I should be afraid.
He hopes to start preaching cross-country in the U.S.
Espíritu Santo, fluye.
Jean Guerrero, KPBS News.
KPBS video journalist Katie Shulov helped produce that story. Making do without clean water, that's the reality for thousands of Californians living in rural communities. Governor Brown is responding with new measures. They call for consolidating state water agencies and allocating resources better to help smaller state and private water agencies. Experts say those groups don't have enough money to provide clean water. A new survey shows wage theft is a significant problem in San Diego County restaurant jobs. Peggy Pico explains the findings.
Wage theft is the illegal practice of not paying workers for all of the time they've worked. And according to the San Diego State CPI survey released today, 77% of more than 330 restaurant employees surveyed report employers stole their wages in the past year. A third said it happens on a regular basis. Here with the details are my guest, Peter Brownell, Research Director at the Center on Policy Initiatives, and Katie Durocher, who worked in local restaurants for nearly 30 years. And Peter, what are some specific examples of wage theft? What are we talking about here?
Well, we're talking about things like working off the clock when employees work before their shift starts, preparing for the day, or when they're continue after they've clocked out to clean up or prepare for the next day. So that's one of the ways. Overtime violations is another, when people work more than 8 hours in a day or 40 hours in a week and they're not paid time and a half as required under state law. Reporting time is another type of violation that we document here, which is a state law that requires people to be paid for at least 2 hours or half their scheduled hours if they show up for work and there's no work available for them.
And how did you conduct this survey? How did you get these numbers?
So it was done in partnership with Dr. Jill Esbenshade in the sociology department here at San Diego State. She had a classroom of graduate students that conducted the surveys. We went out both, to trolleys, to grocery stores, to places like that in the community, and also did presentations on campus to try and reach out to students and people that they might know.
Sure, and in interviews, right? 337 workers, right. 163 restaurants spread out, and 30-minute interviews, correct?
Yeah, so there were There were 337 surveys conducted, either online or face-to-face, and then 30 in-depth interviews that that delved into these issues much more deeply.
Sure, and let me delve in a little bit. The survey examined different types of wage theft experienced by San Diego County restaurant workers in the past year, and found that 60% of the workers were forced to work off the clock without pay, 35% were unpaid for reported time worked, and 30% were not paid for overtime for the workday or work week. Now, Katie, what type of wage theft have you experienced?
Well, I was actually asked by one of the San Diego State individuals that was surveying me to share my story, because I actually worked for a restaurant that just opened up and they were unable to meet payroll expenses. And so I essentially ended up working for tips only and never was able to receive the wages owed to me, even though I received a judgment through the labor board.
What kind of impact, either for you or your friends in this industry, does this sort of wage theft have?
You know, it's really difficult to completely gauge that, but I can share with you that there are, of course, people that may work for 2 weeks or more expecting wages to be paid, and then they don't have money to pay their rent, they don't have money to pay their electric bill, they don't have money to buy food. I am a single mother with 2 children, so of course it has an impact not just on the individual, but on families as well.
And were you able to confront your employer, or it sounds like you did report the problem?
Oh, yes. Well, we actually ended up picketing the restaurant after 6 months, and it subsequently closed, but he is now residing in another state under an assumed name. So even though we received these awards, and there were at least 14 against this individual claims with the labor board, one judgment was over $38,000 alone. Probably will never be realized, unfortunately, because he's not accessible.
All right, and we'll get back to that in a moment. But in a statement to take KPBS, the California Restaurant Association responded to the survey today, saying in part that it has zero tolerance for wage theft, discrimination, or any illegal practices. The CRA provides many resources to ensure our members do not engage in these activities. Unfortunately, this study combines potential legal violations with the author's blatant political agenda. Any violations of current law are concerning. That's the end of that quote. Now, Peter, there are state and federal laws to prevent wage theft. Are they just not being enforced?
I mean, that's really the bottom line is, I mean, what we're talking about here, what we're documenting are laws that are on the books. There's really just, you know, an overwhelming lack of resources for enforcement. The Labor Commissioner has fewer than 100 investigators to protect over 18 million workers in the state. So really the biggest thing that we need is more resources to make investigation resources available. Right now we rely entirely on workers coming forward with complaints, and you know, obviously when they're coming forward with complaints, they're putting their jobs at risk of retaliation, and that makes it very difficult for people to come forward. So what we really need is enough resources that the Labor Commissioner's office can go out and do proactive enforcement without waiting for employees to call them.
I see. Unfortunately, we're out of time, so you can, the folks here at home can read the entire wage theft survey on our website, kpbs.org. Peter and Katie, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Hari Srinivasan. On the next News Hour, our series on the Cuban evolution continues. And wasted food, perfectly good food that never makes it to your table simply because it just doesn't look perfect.
High fever, runny nose, and watery eyes, those are just a few of the symptoms of a highly contagious virus that's been spreading across the country, putting dog lovers on high alert. Penny is a 9-month-old German Shepherd Bulldog mix who loves to play at Dog Beach.
If she even gets the hint that we're headed here, she goes berserk.
Dog parks, daycare centers, and other places where pooches gather can be breeding grounds for canine flu. Moita Fring says she just heard about it this week, but isn't too concerned because there's only one reported case in San Diego since the outbreak started earlier this year.
And I'm on a news feed on Facebook for Ocean Beach, and especially this dog park. So everybody tells everybody what's going on within about 5 seconds. So we know there's dog flu out there. It would be on there, and I'd read it.
We look in their eyes, make sure there's no conjunctivitis, look for any nasal discharge around the nose, and then listen to their chest.
Dr. James Ransom is a veterinarian with the San Diego Humane Society. He says the virus gets passed through the air when dogs sneeze or cough. but it doesn't sicken people.
Currently, there hasn't been any sort of crossover between dogs and people, but the virus can mutate, so it's something that we're always worried about in the public health arena, but we haven't seen that yet.
Ransom does have this advice for dog owners who like to take their pets to beaches, parks, and other large gathering places.
So if you are going to visit those places, make sure your dogs are fully vaccinated, make sure they're healthy, and try to avoid taking smaller puppies that haven't had their full shots to those types of places.
About 1,000 dogs came down with canine flu in Chicago earlier this year, but Dr. Ransom says in the majority of cases the virus is not fatal and there are tests to determine if your dog has it. It's warming up in San Diego. The National Weather Service has already issued a heat advisory for the desert. It will last right into the weekend. Now, we're looking at a mix of sun and clouds along the coast over the next few days, with temperatures there in the upper 70s, 80s and 90s for the inland valleys. Plenty of sunshine in the mountains with temperatures in the 90s. Again, the desert is under a heat advisory now, with forecasts for 113 degrees over the next few days. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thank you for joining us. Have a great night.